Good morning. Today's reading is from Matthew chapter 15, verses 32 to 38. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, or they might collapse on the way. His disciples answered, Where could we get enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd? How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. 7, they replied, and a few small fish. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. Then he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and when he had given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples, and they in turn to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was 4,000 men, besides women and children.
Good morning. So, welcome to the month of October. We're well into our fall season, and as such, I just want to take this time now to take stock of what we have done together on Sundays as we went through our sermon series. We've gone through a lot, right? In 2018, we talked about our faith foundations, the things that really, I guess, the basic things that we put as a structure for how we grow. Beginning with the church, we talked about the fact that we are one family, that we are one body, that Jesus is our head. And as Jesus being our head, we talked about the next thing that we had as a sermon series, becoming like Jesus. And as we become more and more like Jesus, we think about how we act in our everyday lives. And we talked about overcoming daily challenges because we encounter all these many difficult things. And we do it in the light of who Jesus is and what he has taught us. And then after that, we went back to talk about the church, right? We talked about one another commands, how we carry each other's burdens, how we love one another, and so on. And then after that, it's not complete if we don't wrap up our faith foundation study for the year without Jesus. So we talked about Jesus in song because he is our foundation. In 2019, we talked about spiritual growth, and we're still doing that right now. We're focusing on growing spiritually. And in January of 2019, we started that off with our series called Full Devotion to God. You guys remember when Miles, that's what I remember, when Miles was here, he was eating a banana, remember that? That's that series right there. And he said, we have to be careful because if we're not careful, we will end up just having our scraps, our banana peels left over to give to God, right? So we talked about devoting ourselves fully to God. And then after that, we talked about the parables of Jesus, because if we're going to grow spiritually, we need to learn a lot from Jesus. Again, as you can see, there's a lot in there involving Jesus in our studies, right? Next, we talked about growing to maturity. We talked about that in the summer. That was our sermon series for the summer, growing to maturity, to really highlight and underscore that important fact. And then in the month of September, we talked about living gospel-worthy lives, okay? Now, today, we are going to start a new sermon series. And I think my voice just changed there. Just hit puberty there. We are going to live the gospel-worthy life there, but we're going to continue on that train of thought in terms of growing spiritually. And the reason is because in 2020, we are going to embark on a very important spiritual task that God has called us to do, all of us to do. And that focus that we're going to have in 2020 is evangelism. It's not going to be effective unless we really grow and focus on Jesus, because we're not going to tell people about Jesus if we're not really sold out on him. Do you guys understand that? If we don't really have that complete faith and trust and devotion to Jesus, we are not going to share that with people. So for our sermon series starting today, I would like to or we'd like to focus on lessons from the life of Jesus. And with that, we're going to achieve two things. We're going to grow learning about Jesus, and then we're going to focus way more on Jesus and thus increase in our relationship with him. Okay, we're going to do that from today up until the end of December. But what I'm going to do this morning for the first lesson in our series is I'm going to talk to us about trusting Jesus. And we all understand that I'm pretty sure we all 100% agree that trusting Jesus is a good thing. We all trust Jesus. But the question that I want us to ask individually in the title of our lesson this morning is this: how much do you trust Jesus? We all trust Jesus, but to what extent? So this morning, I would like to do that by looking into the life of Jesus. And in particular, we're going to look at the story Alvaro just read before us in Matthew 15, 32 to 38. That is when Jesus fed the multitudes, the 4,000. Okay? And as we go through that, I'm just going to highlight 4 things that Jesus said that will cause us to really put our trust on him 100%. Never holding back. Understanding that he is capable, powerful, and loving and compassionate enough that our trust will not be lost in him. Okay, let's start. But before we look at Matthew 15:32, I just want to give you guys a background. So, starting in Matthew 15:32, the background of that is that paint this picture in your minds. Jesus was walking around in that area east of the Sea of Galilee. He's ministering, telling people about the kingdom of God. He's telling people about who he is, right? And he's healing, and he's healing all the sick, all the lame, all the blind, the demon-possessed people. He was doing that. But from time to time, you would notice in his ministry, he would take himself out from that busy ministry, and he would sequester himself away from these people so he could pray, he could meditate, he could sometimes mourn, or prepare for big things in his ministry. But we also understand in the gospel accounts that sometimes it's hard for him to do that. And this is one of those times. He wanted to go up the mountain, perhaps to be by himself, but then it's hard because he doesn't have the mode of transportation that we do today. He only had his feet and the boat, but everybody sees him on the boat. So they would just follow him everywhere he went. This particular story today is no different. So he went up the mountain, but everybody still followed him. Okay? But this is an amazing thing. Like, when you want to be by yourself, you can easily just say to people, "Oh, yeah, just leave me alone," or "I can't." Right? We do that sometimes, but that's fine. But this is what Jesus did. Look at what Jesus did or said. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, "I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way." So Jesus told his disciples that he has compassion for these people. And that right there is the first thing that we need to realize about Jesus. We're talking about how much we trust Jesus. I know we understand this, but it's important for us to remember that he has compassion for us, right? Some of you guys have been with Jesus, have been following Jesus for years, for decades, for scores. And you have been through so many things, and you're still here. We sang that song earlier today. Never once did we ever walk alone. Never once did we make it on our own because of Jesus. But his compassion is not just something in his mind or in his heart. He just doesn't go, "Oh, poor people," and then he goes by doing his stuff. His compassion for us is demonstrated in action. In this particular example, his compassion for these people, he wanted to demonstrate that by feeding them because he has identified a need that they had. Right? So imagine he is saying this to his disciples for for ease of use today, to his apostles. Imagine the 12 apostles were there. He's telling them this. I want to feed these people. If you're one of the apostles, what would you tell him? Would you be bogged down with, well, this is a remote area. Where are you gonna get the food? There's no superstore here or whatever. There's nothing here. You think about that. But reserve your answer for a sec. Don't answer that question yet. Because you need an important fact. Think about what his disciples have already seen him do. What his disciples have already experienced him do and witnessed him do. Okay? In Matthew chapters 8 and 9 alone, there's so many examples there of the disciples, of the apostles, witnessing Jesus do all sorts of wonderful things. Like, for example, he would heal people that are demon possessed. He would heal people that are lepers. He would raise people from the dead. In fact, one of them was remember a centurion? There was a centurion that came to Jesus and said, Jesus, I know you. I have a servant in my house who is sick. Can you please heal him? Jesus is like, did you want me to go over to your house? You know what the centurion did? Centurion said, no, you don't have to. I'm not worthy to have you over my house, but I know how powerful you are. Just say the words, and I know my servant is going to be healed in my house. And so Jesus said, I've never seen faith like this before. So he did as he asked. His servant was healed. The disciples were there. That's why we read it, because they wrote about it. They witnessed this. And then one time, there was a storm. Remember, there was this storm. It was night. They were in the sea, and then they were afraid because they were going to die. Jesus was on the boat sleeping. What do? They wake Jesus up. We're going to die. And what did Jesus say? Oh, you of little faith. And then he commanded the wind and the storm to stop. And the apostles were like, who is this man? He could command the wind and the storm. And then they answered to him. They've seen that. Okay, but it doesn't end there. There was this time as well when there was this woman who was I believe hemorrhaging, and then she believed that even if she just touched Jesus' cloak, she would be healed. Do you remember that? And so she did. And then the disciples learned about this. That's why we can read about it. And they witnessed that. But in Matthew 10, you know what Jesus made the disciples do? He sent the 12 out to minister to the Jews of the area. And he empowered them to heal the sick, the lame, the blind, and the demon-possessed. They did that with their own hands through Jesus. And then just a few days ago, Jesus fed the 5,000. So when Jesus tells you, like for example, at that time you were all there, hey guys, I want to feed all these people. What do you think? What are you going to say? Yeah, let's do that. I know what you can do. I've seen you do stuff. But here's what the disciples said. His disciples answered, where could we get enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd? Right? I want you to focus on that. Where could we get enough bread? You know, sometimes I say the same thing. Sometimes you say the same thing. That's why we're here today, is we want to encourage ourselves to not say that ever again. When Jesus asks us, where could we get enough bread? I think we know what he's trying to say. He's trying to say, when the disciples say that, when we say that to each other, we're trying to say, well, I don't think you can do it. I'm not sure what you've done before. I forgot. So we need to remember we need to remember what Jesus has done for us. We read about it, and it happens in our lives. And I remember, you guys have experiences of your own that allow you to always, when something bad happens, you think about that memory and you go, oh, I remember. I am going back to Jesus because I know before it happened to me, all I had was Jesus and he pulled through. I have to my recent recollection, the thing that I hold on to the most right now, that I remember when, when came to shove, that something happened to me, Jesus pulled through, was when I dialed 911 for the first time. I don't know if I told you this story. Some of you have heard this story before, but we were in Edmonton. I believe it was 2014. Jacob was about 2, 3 years old. And I remember Jacob got out of his bed, went to our bedroom at around 1 or 2 o'clock. Normally would say to him, go back to bed, and he would go back to bed. But this time he insisted he slept with us. So we said, that was weird, but we allowed it. He was there, but he was warm to the touch. Long story short, we were woken up. Jacob was convulsing. He was convulsing. His eyes were going in the back of his head. He was stiff. His back is arched like this. He was foaming in the mouth. He was turning blue. And at that time, I thought I was going to lose my boy. Have you guys ever experienced that? Have you ever thought about losing your son or your child? That was the most scary thing that I've ever felt in my life. I was crying. And at that time, I remember, Jesus, you are all that I have. I didn't know what to do. And when Jesus is all that we have, your faith grows really quickly. I dialed 911. Long story short, Jacob is still here with us. He's alive, right? And at that moment, I promised God, whenever anything happens at all, I will go to you first. I will never say, well, where could we get enough bread? Because I have proven you, Lord. I have seen you at work. And I know you have that experience as well. And I encourage you to hold on to that. Do not forget that. Next, this is what Jesus said. How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. 7, they replied, and a few small fish. So focus on that. Jesus said, how many loaves do you have? Why would Jesus ask that? Did he need the disciples to come up with stuff so that he can perform his miracle? Think about it. Did he need people? Or if you don't come up with things, I won't be able to do this miracle. So you got to give me something. No, he doesn't. Why did he even do this? Why did he even ask this? The simple reason is because we are in a relationship with him. We are partners with him in the work in this kingdom. Do you see that? When he says, how many loaves do you have? He's saying, what are you prepared to do? When he says, how many loaves do you have? He's saying, what are you prepared to sacrifice? What is going to be your part in this? Like a really good parent, he just doesn't do everything for his child because he wants this child to grow. It's the same thing with them, right? Isn't that amazing? You know, there's so many things that happen. Like, there's so many miracles that we see in the Bible, and you think, what are they for? What are they there for? And you understand it's there so that we can have a stronger faith in God, knowing that he can actually do all this. But for some reason, the disciples, including us, it's like, we don't remember, we forget, right? It's like the necessity of having, those warning labels that are really out there. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Like, you have a coffee and it says careful, hot. Of course. You know what I'm saying? Like, this one time I was in a hotel room. For some reason, I had a brand new iron. I was ironing. I had to open this thing. And there's this big sticker on the iron that I had to peel off. The sticker said, never iron clothes that are still being worn. And then one time we were living in England. We were looking for a stroller for Jacob because Jacob was born there. We had to get this stroller. I remember I was testing one of the strollers, how they fold and things, and there's this big sign: never fold the stroller with the baby in it. You know those signs? And one time I was in a Bass Pro shop somewhere in the States. There's this like big fishing lure with 3 hooks in there. It says right on there, harmful if swallowed. Why? Maybe because people were actually going to do it. Why does Jesus give us these things that we experience in our lives that are not good? Well, I know the reason why. Because he wants us to always face him when these happen. He always wants us to put our eyes to the direction of Jesus, saying, I know I'm going through this, but I know you have me. That's what happens to us. I have a verse here. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God. I love this verse because it talks about relationship. Okay? But before I get there, I just want to highlight this point. I understand you guys we all have relationships. And in a relationship, it's a give and take. Each party has their part in the relationship. That's why it's called a partnership. That's why it's called a relationship. Because it's always this person doing stuff. It's not a relationship. Okay? It's both. For example, Linda and me. Linda, my wife. Linda loves to cook, and she cooks at home. That's her part. My part is I cook. I don't cook. I clean. Sorry, I clean. I can't even boil water. I clean. I wash the dishes. I do the laundry. I fold the laundry. I iron. I love doing that stuff. Okay. When it comes to electrical, anything electrical, that's her part. Like she knows how to work the switches. I don't know any of that. Okay, because I didn't grow up with electricity. I didn't have a fridge or anything when I was growing up. She did all that. Okay? But when it comes to the shower drain clogging, I do that. Okay? Because I'm the guy who takes out 45 pounds of hair from the shower drain. If she had to do it, she won't be able to do it. That's a partnership. That's a relationship. When it comes to us and God, it's the same thing. It's a relationship. He said, I will be your God, you will be my people. And right in front of us is God's part and our part. Grace is God's part. Only He can give that to us. He looked at us and He said, oh, poor people. They're going to die without me. If I don't help them, they're going to die. Because the wages of sin is death. They're going to die without me. So he sent His Son to die on the cross for our sins so we could all be saved. But the thing is, that grace sits there unused. That gift is sitting there unwrapped without our part, faith. When we hear about this grace, our part is to believe in it, to take a hold of it, to use it. And faith, according to James, I believe it's 2 verse 17, faith without works is dead. If you don't use it, it doesn't mean anything. That's our part. That's why Jesus asks, how many loaves do you have? What is our part? Okay? Think about that. Finally, He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. Then He took the 7 loaves and the fish. And when He had given thanks, He broke them and gave them to the disciples. And they in turn to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. Focus on this. He took the 7 loaves and the fish. Do you guys ever imagine there's 4,000 people there because that was the setting. But it said in verse 38 of Matthew 15 that there were 4,000 men, not including women and children. So it could easily be 8,000 people there. Jesus is there, and Jesus said, What do you have? What do you have? And then you have 7 loaves of bread, and you go, should I even mention this to Jesus? 7 loaves to feed 8,000 people? I'm not going to even bother. But the apostles bothered to mention it to him because he asked. And you know what he did? What Jesus did? He used them. He used the little that they had to show how great Jesus was, to bring glory and honor to God the Father. It's the same thing with us today. What do you have in your hands? Don't say it's too small. If what you can offer right now, your faith allows you to come here every Sunday, that's all you have right now, come here every Sunday. But don't stop there. Keep growing, right? Put on the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. You do all that. But that doesn't happen in a vacuum. You can't do that just in your basement, staying there forever. Be with the people of God, right? Spend time with the church. Serve the church. Get to know your brothers and sisters in Christ. Grow that way. It's so much better that when that happens. That could be your 7 loaves and fish. And just keep on growing. And you know what God's going to do? God is going to multiply that like he did here. He is going to effect in all of us amazing results. How many leftovers did they have? 7 basketfuls of that stuff left over. They gorged themselves, and then they had 7 basketfuls left over. Remember. But I know, okay, that's the lesson for today, right? The lesson is simple. The lesson is that we trust God because he is powerful, because he is able, because he cares for us, because he uses what we have to give as our part, because we are partners. You guys are going to leave. You guys are going to remember that. But sometimes you will forget. Okay? Like the disciples did. After this, you know what happened? After this particular story, in Matthew chapter 16, this is what happened. Jesus said to them, "Watch and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." And they began discussing it among themselves, saying, "We brought no bread." They thought Jesus was talking about bread because it was important to him. Like, oh, we didn't bring any bread. He's going to be upset at us. He's talking about bread. Sometimes we do that. But then Jesus said, but Jesus, aware of this, said, "Oh, you of little faith, why are you discussing among yourselves the fact that you have no bread? Do you not remember? Do you not yet perceive? Don't you understand? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000? Remember I fed the 5,000 there? I'm not talking about bread because I can make it out of nothing. Do you remember how many baskets you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000? How many baskets you gathered? He can provide for us. We just need to remember this word. Just remember. Remember the stories that we have been learning throughout the years. The words that we have been so passionately have been discussing throughout the years from the Bible. And remember the things that have happened in your lives. Remember. So today as we stand and sing, I want us to think about the words. "'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus. How I've proved you over and over. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus. Oh, for grace to trust him more." Let us stand up as we sing.